Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. We've all heard, and we've talked about it before, people make emotional decisions, not rational ones, when deciding what to purchase, even in B2B. As today's guest and author Nancy Harhut discusses in her book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. But how can teams make their marketing campaigns more of a science while still keeping the art of creativity in the mix? I'm joined by Nancy on today's episode to discuss the topic. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Jen, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to get into this topic today. And I know, a lot of our audience is, insights folks and people in market research and data science. And so this kind of blend of why we're talking about behavioral science when it comes to marketing is, I think, a really interesting one. And our audience is going to love it. So if you're listening in, thanks for joining. But thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, happy to be here. And I agree with you. I think the topic is fascinating, why people do what they do and how we as marketers can get them to do more of what we want. I mean, it's, who could not be interested in that, right?
Exactly. That's the goal, right? Figuring out how to get people to do what we want them to do, or understand their behaviors so we can meet them where they are. So to get us started, can you talk about some of the core principles of behavioral science and how they can be applied to improve marketing campaigns?
Sure. I'd be happy to. So there are two that spring to mind right away, and one of them I know a little bit about, and one of them I know a lot about. So I'll touch on the first, and we can go deep on the second. How does that sound? So the first, okay, great. So the first is, when we're talking about behavioral science, behavioral scientists have found that very often people don't really know why they do what they do. Right? We think we know why we do what we do. And so, when we as marketers survey our customers or, get them involved in focus groups, when we ask people why they did something, why they bought something, why they liked something, why they didn't buy it, why they didn't like it, people will give us what they believe is their honest answer. They're not trying to mislead us. They're not trying to lie to us. But behavioral scientists have found that very often there are other factors at play that influence people's decisions, and people aren't even aware of those factors. So when they tell us why they're doing something, they honestly believe they're giving the right answer, but there are other factors at play that they're not aware of, so they can't articulate. But those factors are important to us as marketers. So there are actually research organizations now that have sprung up that are much better at getting at the implicit drivers of behavior, the real reasons people do what they do, the real feelings people have. And I, as a creative person in marketing, have worked with them, and it can be really very insightful to really get at why people do what they do. But the second thing that behavioral science tells us, and this is something that I'm much more well versed in, is that people don't make these well thought out well considered decisions. What they do instead is they rely on decision making shortcuts. So what's a decision making shortcut? It's an automatic, instinctive, reflexive response. Humans have developed these over the ages as a way to conserve mental energy, because we couldn't possibly weigh every bit of information before making a decision, or we'd never get around to making any. So we've developed these hardwired behaviors, these automatic responses. And what we do is we kind of cruise along through life on autopilot. We encounter a certain situation and we just default to these hardwired behaviors, giving the matter at hand little, if any, consideration. And the cool thing about these automatic behaviors, these hardwired behaviors, is they can be triggered, right? So as marketers, if we're aware that somebody is more likely to do X if we say Y, then we're going to say Y, right? We're going to put that prompt or that nudge in place to increase the likelihood that people do what we're hoping that they'll do. And that's something that I practice when I'm doing work for my clients, whether I'm setting up email campaigns or social campaigns or direct mail campaigns or ad campaigns. But basically, I blend the best practices of the discipline with the behavioral science to provide a kind of a 1-2 punch to increase the likelihood that people will do what my clients want them to do. And that I find absolutely fascinating, that there are ways that we can prompt these instinctive behaviors. We can nudge them in order to increase the likelihood that we get the click, or we get the call, or we get the trial, or the repurchase. It's really very, very powerful stuff. And I think anyone in marketing, anyone who's managing a business, should be aware of these kind of behavioral science triggers, because it can really increase the ROI that we get from our campaigns.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Now, are these triggers, are they sort of universal? Are they like, are there kind of standard examples that work, maybe not every time, but almost every time? Or is it unique to each kind of offering or company or customer segment, maybe?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a really insightful question, and there's a shorter answer and a longer answer. So the shorter answer is yes, they're fairly universal. People are people. Humans haven't really changed all that much, over the centuries and millennia. We're kind of hardwired in a certain way, and some of the automatic behaviors that we have, humans developed as a way basically to stay alive. And maybe we were running from, I don't know, saber-toothed tigers or something, and so it taught us to act now and think later. And all these years later, we're not running from saber-toothed tigers, but we still have a tendency to make quick decisions, without really thinking about them. We're motivated to avoid fear. We're motivated to quickly decide, friend or foe, eat or be eaten, fight or flight, and so that's still part of us all these years later. So the short answer is yes, they're relatively universal. The longer answer is a little bit more nuanced, and that is behavioral scientists have found that there are certain differences that are based on maybe geography or maybe gender. For example, and don't, I'm just reporting the research here, so don't shoot the messenger. But men are considered to be a little bit more competitive. Women are considered to be a little bit more cooperative. So if we were constructing a call to action and our target was primarily women, we might want to say something like, together we can find the solution. Together we can accomplish this. If we're talking to a primarily male target, we might say something more like, see where you compare, see how you stack up against, see how you can beat, um, and, so again, they're a little bit more nuanced, also in terms of, geography. The Western culture is a little bit more competitive, a little bit more self-centered. Eastern cultures are a little bit more collective, more community-based, more, what's good for all of us is a little bit more better than, or a little bit better, a little bit more important, I should say, than what's good for just one person. So there are those kinds of nuances. And there are also certain age nuances. For example, behavioral scientists have found that the older that we get, the less interested we're in uh, the less interested we're in bad news. Like, we just don't want to engage with it. It's almost like we feel like we've gotten to the point where we don't have to engage with it anymore. Whereas when we're a little bit younger, we're more tuned into it, and as a result, we're more motivated to avoid it. So, one of the things that behavioral scientists talk a lot about is loss aversion, that we're more motivated to avoid the pain of loss than we are to achieve the pleasure of gain. But it seems that the older we get, maybe the less sensitive we are to that. But again, Jen, these are nuances. But globally speaking, universally speaking, broadly speaking, humans are hardwired to just rely on these decision making shortcuts. And the funny thing is, when we think about it, like, I think about myself and I think, oh no, I make well thought out decisions. I know exactly why I'm doing. I do research, or I choose based on preference, or based on my needs. And again, all of that is true. But what I'm not taking into account from my own behavior, and therefore by extension for the behavior of my prospects and my clients, is you know uh, we're all influenced by these factors that we're not aware of. And you'd mentioned earlier the idea of emotion, and the truth of the matter is, very often people make a decision based on emotional reasons, and then they later justify the decision for rational reasons. So for marketers, we need to have both. And if you ask someone why they did something, they'll point to the rational reasons, but the truth of the matter is, it was the emotion that maybe you know push them initially towards making that decision. And that's an example of one of those more universal, more broadly applicable behavioral science triggers. So that's kind of a long answer to your succinct question. But broadly speaking, yes, these apply across the board. As we start to drill down into our targets, what we're going to find is some maybe work a little bit better than others based on who we're talking to, based on what our message is, maybe even based on what industry we're in. But they're all applicable. In my book, I cover, I think, over 25 of them, and they're all kind of like my 25 go-tos that they've worked for me year after year after year, different clients, different verticals, different media. They're my go-tos because they just really seem to deliver when marketers need them to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's super interesting and helpful to think about those. And I think I love hearing you kind of talk about sort of our background, like where we came from as humans and how we're hardwired to make those decisions and what our priorities are. And the first time I heard somebody talk about this in the context of marketing, I did a storytelling workshop a few years ago, and it was all based on kind of Donald Miller's book, which I'm a big fan of. And he talks about exactly that. Like if you're at a networking event and people are talking to each other about, hey, what does your company do? What do you do? Nobody's listening. They're all looking around the room to see who's going to help them survive when somebody storms the castle, right? And it's not a conscious thing. It's just a priority thing, right? So you only have so much. You said conserving mental energy, like making these quick decisions to conserve mental energy. This concept of getting people the information they need in the simplest form so that they don't have to use too many sort of mental calories is so important in marketing. And it just that kind of crossover between business behavior, buying behavior, decision making, and psychology is super interesting to me. But it's all related.
I know it definitely is. And I want to build on something that you just mentioned. You brought up the idea of simple messages. And that is such great advice that you're giving your audience, Jenn, because regardless of who we're talking to, whether it's a B2B audience, a B2C audience, whether it's, highly educated or maybe not as educated, study after study after study shows that people prefer information that's simple, that's easy to grasp. Sometimes, particularly in B2B, we make the mistake of thinking, oh, well, we have a really highly educated audience and they're at the upper echelons of their company, and we just need to, use more sophisticated language, and we need to, speak in their vernacular, and we need to use, acronyms and buzzwords. And the truth of the matter is, even if people understand that, they still prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand. As a matter of fact, behavioral scientists talk about something called cognitive fluency, which kind of makes me smile because it's a long phrase for a very easy idea, which is people prefer things that are easy to think about and easy to understand. So they should call it simple thinking or simple phrasing, but they call it cognitive fluency, right? But it goes to mental processing, and we prefer these things that are easier to think about and easier to understand. Not only do we prefer them, we have a tendency to believe them more. We judge them to be more truthful and more accurate, and we feel more confident in our ability to make a decision about them. And when you think about it, that's what we want in marketing, right? We want people to be able to make a decision. Because if they don't feel confident, what do? They put off the decision. And if they put off the decision, it may never happen, or they may go someplace else where they feel, uh, on surer footing and give the business to that other company, that other organization. So, we really want to make things easy for people to understand. It's not that we're talking down to them. It's not that we're thinking that they can't, deal with more sophisticated language or reams and reams of information. It's just that we're making it easy for them, and that's what they prefer. There was a study that came out of, gosh, I forget the university. I think it was, I think the author's name was Oppenheimer, though. And what he did is he took these PhD dissertation abstracts, and he had two versions. He had the abstract written the way it was, and then he had another version of it where they took every word that was 9 letters or longer and they replaced it with a shorter synonym. And then they had people read the two versions, the original and the one that was, a little bit more easy to read and understand. What they found was not only did very highly educated people who are reading these, not only did they prefer the version that had the shorter words, they judge the author to be more intelligent. So, here we are thinking, well, we have to, have this very sophisticated, complicated, involved, language, because that's how we're going to come across as being knowledgeable and professional. And it turns out that, the version that had the simpler synonyms, not only did people prefer it, they judge the author to be more intelligent. So it's going to reflect well on us to make it easy for people because, as you said, Jen, people are trying to conserve mental energy. They're trying to multitask. Their attention is being pulled in a million different directions. And, anything we can do to make it easier for them to come to the conclusion we want them to come to is a very good thing. It's good for us and it's good for them, right? We're helping them get to their decision in a more expedient way. And that reflects well on us. So I love your point about making things simple, whether it's B2B or B2C, just making it easy for our customers and our prospects.
Right, absolutely. Well, and like you said, if someone's making that decision based on emotion or that sort of automatic trigger at the start, and then they need to justify it later, there may be opportunities later to get into more complexity or share more detail that is a little bit less simple down the road, but it's not the way to grab people right at the beginning. So it's, like you said, you kind of in marketing maybe need a little bit of both, but it's really about at what point in the journey are people ready for those different messages.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, obviously, we want to give people what they want to know. We don't want to overload them. We don't want to give it to them too soon. We don't want to withhold it so that they can't find it. It's
Mhm.
interesting. You can have a company that doesn't mention something. They provide it, but they just don't mention it, and their competition does mention it. And suddenly, you think that this first company doesn't offer it just because they didn't say it. So we have to be careful that we're providing the right information at the right time. And then there are other companies who have actually built their brands on saying something that everybody in the industry does, but no one else says. I think about Mobile Gasoline. They branded themselves as the detergent gasoline. And apparently all gasoline has detergent in it. But now when you think about having gasoline that's going to make your engine clean, you think about Mobile because they said something that was true that anyone could say in the industry, but no one was saying it. They said
Mhm.
it. Anyone else that now says it is kind of like a Me Too or an also ran. So it's your point about providing the right information at the right time is absolutely key. We don't want to overwhelm people because we need to
Sure.
hook them and bring them in. But when they're getting close to the sorting process, making the short list, making the buying decision, we need to give them the information that they're looking for. And you know if we fail to mention something, even if we provide it, they may think we don't have it. Um,
Mm.
so we need to include it, but we just have to make sure that we're serving it up in the right way and at the right time. No question about it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So tell me, what about how does understanding biases factor in? How does that help maybe craft some of those more persuasive messaging and calls to action?
Sure. So, it's funny in marketing, we have been taught, Jen, for years and years and years that if we get the right message to the right person at the right time, we'll get the right results. And it
Mhm.
turns out that that's only part of the story. Because what we really have to do is we have to get the right message to the right person at the right time, but in the right way. And when I say in the right way, I mean in a brain friendly way. And so what's a brain friendly way? Well, it's a way that's easy for somebody to understand the information. It's a way that they're going to be more likely to notice the information. It's a way that they're going to be more likely to remember it, and in a way that they're going to feel more motivated to act on it. And so what we want to do is we want to tap into certain behavioral science principles that will allow us to make that happen. So um, you know the first thing someone has to do is notice our message, right? So we want it to be brain friendly, and we want it to be easily paid attention to. It's going to stand out. So we could tap into something called the von Restorff effect. The von Restorff effect holds that things that are different from their surroundings are the things that get noticed. And again, this goes way back to our ancient ancestors. They'd get up in the morning, they'd, I don't know, look out of the cave, right? And kind of scan the horizon. And if everything looked the way it did the day before, that was a good thing, right? It meant that things were relatively safe. But if something were different when they were taking things in, if something that had been there was missing, or if something that hadn't been there now was, that could present a threat. And in those days, it was a real life or death threat. All these years later, not so much, but yet we're still hardwired to notice things that are different. So this has incredible applications for us as we're developing our creative. It could be something as simple as our email subject lines, right? Research shows that if you start your subject line with an emoji, you can get a double-digit lift. If you start your subject line by putting the first word or two in brackets or parentheses, you can get like a 21 or a 22% lift in opening rates. If you all cap a word or two in your subject line, it used to be thought of as shouting, right? And we
Mhm.
don't want to shout, but uh, World Data, which analyzes like millions and millions and millions of emails every year, found that if you all cap fewer than 50% of the words in your subject line, so if you do one or two, maybe three, you can get a 22% lift in your opening rate. And the reason for the emojis working, the reason for the brackets or the subject lines working, the reason for, I'm sorry, the brackets or the parentheses working, the reasons for one or two words being all capped working, all comes down to this idea of the von Restorff effect, because most people aren't doing those things. As you're scanning your inbox, your eye goes to the brackets or the parentheses, or it goes to that one word that's all capped in the subject line, or it goes to that emoji that's starting out the subject line. So we notice things that stand out from their surroundings. So that's one way that behavioral science can help us create these brain friendly messages, so that they stand out. Then we want to make sure that people understand them. And you and I just had a conversation about cognitive fluency and what's going to make people understand the information better. It's going to be if it's cognitively fluent, if we use language that's easy to understand, if we use language that's not confusing. Same thing with our layouts and our visual presentations. We don't want to have thick blocks of copy. We want to have enough white space. We want to break things up with subheads, with bullets, with numbered lists. Make it easy and inviting. Just make it look easy and inviting. Choose a typeface that's accessible and that's common. There was a study that showed that people who read about an exercise and it was written in a very simple typeface, maybe Arial or something, and then other people read the same exercise, but it was written in a more complex typeface like Brushy. People estimated that it would take much longer to do the exercise when it was, when they read about it when it was written in Brushy. Why? Because it was harder to read. Because it's a more complex, ornate, typeface. It's just not as common. It's not as cognitively fluent. And what people thought was, if it was harder to read, it would be harder to do. If it took longer
Yeah.
to read, it would take longer to do. So making things cognitively fluent helps us, make sure that they're understood. So we want to make sure that things stand out by using things like the von Restorff effect. We want to make sure that people understand the information by tapping into cognitive fluency. And then, we want to motivate them to respond. And a lot of times, again, people's attention is fractured. They're trying to accomplish a lot. They got a lot on their plate. And so you think, that's interesting. I'll come back to it later. Or, maybe I'll, maybe I should do that, but nope, got to go pick up the kids from school now, or got to go shovel the walk or whatever, and something, life intervenes, right? And so we want to add certain things to our marketing messages so that they're a little bit more motivational. So it could be using the idea of scarcity, letting people know that, gee, there are only a certain number of these left, or that this sold out in the past, it's likely to sell out again. Or maybe we want to let them know that there's a time limit, or we want to use a countdown clock. Countdown clocks can get you a double-digit lift in conversion if you use them in your emails, again, according to World Data. But you can also use them on your landing pages, on your websites. But as people see those numbers rolling off, they know that that's time they're never going to get back. They know that they're, if they don't act now, they may lose the opportunity. We talked about loss aversion, the idea of, maybe framing things in terms of not what you're going to gain, but what you're going to lose, right? So the idea about loss aversion is people are more motivated. They're actually twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. But Jen, when you think about what we do in marketing, we as marketers focus on the gains, don't we? We double down on the gains, the advantages, the benefits, all the wonderful things that will happen if you just click, if you just buy, if you just read and respond, if you somehow engage with me. It's going to be great for you. Buy my product and your life will be wonderful. That's kind of what we do. And there's nothing wrong with benefits. And I'm not suggesting we walk away from them, but what I am suggesting is a little well-placed loss aversion can go a long way. Maybe we want to say, instead of save today, we want to say, you're going to pay more if you wait until tomorrow, right? Or
Mm.
instead of saying take advantage of, we say don't miss out on. So there are, certain phrases and frames and words that we can use just to motivate people to respond sooner, to take the action in the moment. So these are all the things that brain science helps us do. By creating these brain-friendly messages, we help our messages stand out and get noticed. We help people understand them and feel good about them, and we help people respond to them in a timely fashion. So again, it's the right message to the right person at the right time and in the right way, in this brain-friendly way, in this way that taps into these behavioral science principles. Essentially, what we're doing is we're using what science has proven about human behavior in order to influence it. And so I think those are some of the ways that understanding these biases that humans have actually help us as marketers create more effective campaigns and drive higher ROI from those campaigns.
Yeah, amazing. I want to dig into some of this stuff a little deeper. This like motivation stuff is really interesting to me, but we've got some great comments from everybody listening in live. Thank you for joining. One in particular, it looks like this one is from Jorge, my friend Jorge. Thanks for listening. That there's some critics out there that are arguing that these behavioral science concepts are oversimplifying complex human behavior, sort of reducing it, ignoring the broader context that decisions are made. So curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, I think he raises a very good point. And, like anything, there is the risk of distilling it down to something that's too basic. And, the idea of context is absolutely correct. I think all of these behavioral science triggers and principles and applications need to be vetted based on context, because what might work in one context may not work in another. What might work for, one kind of person may not work for another. There's a lot of work being done right now in this idea of whether people are more prevention focused or promotion focused. If you're more promotion focused, maybe a gain will work better than a don't miss out on, right? So we do run the risk of oversimplifying things, and so we always want to look at context. That said, what I like to talk about is blending behavioral science with marketing best practices. And I think embedded in the idea of marketing best practices is understanding your target, understanding their mindset, understanding not only why they should do what we're asking them to do, but also understanding why they might not want to do what we're asking them to do. And I think that's a mistake sometimes marketers make. We over-index on the why you should do it, and we give short shrift to why someone might not want to. And that I think gives us a lot of context. What's going on in their head, what are they thinking, what's the competitive situation look like. All of that context informs how we should craft these messages, including which of the behavioral science principles that we should draw upon. And then um, I think there are 2 points to be made, two additional points to be made. One is there's no silver bullet, there's no magic wand. I can't make everybody do what I want them to do. Nobody
Hmm.
can, right? Nobody
Yeah.
can. And so if you walk away from this thinking, oh, I just plug this in and it's going to work for 100% of my target, you're walking away with the wrong message. But what we are talking about is increasing the likelihood that someone may do what we want them to do. So the first thing is, it's not going to work for everybody. And the second thing is you want to use these ethically, you want to use these responsibly. We talked about scarcity a little bit earlier. We talked about the fact that, people maybe are more likely to uh, respond now if quantities are limited, or if the time is limited. And that's actually, it's very true. It's actually true. It's absolutely true, I should say. But we don't want to use that if in fact quantities are not limited. We don't want to say last day today and then tomorrow come out with the same message, because that erodes brand trust, and that's very hard, if not impossible, to recover. So while we want to use what science has proven about human behavior in order to motivate that behavior, we want to do it in a responsible way, in an ethical way, in a way that is going to benefit both our prospect as well as our company, right? We want to make it easy for them to do something that's really going to benefit them, and also that would, of course, benefit us as well. But we want to do it in a way that's respecting who our customers and prospects are. No question about it.
I love that point. I think that's so important to, don't, we started off this conversation saying like, how do we get people to do what we want them to do? But doing it in a sort of ethical and trustworthy way is so important as well. And like you said, like you don't want to put up fake testimonials or lie about your offering or say that you're doing something that you actually don't, or like you said, like saying last day, and then tomorrow there's another deal, because that will, I know for me, just as a buyer of products in the world, like if I see that there's a company that, sort of always has a 30% off sale, like I'm not worried about missing out on this one because I know there's going to be another one in a week. They always have another one, right? So it sort of actually defeats the purpose of trying to motivate someone to act in the moment as opposed to waiting for that next deal. If you get that, sort of feeling that like, hey, they're not actually being truthful here. This sale's not ending tomorrow. I'll just wait for the next one.
Yeah, no, it can actually backfire on us as marketers. We can train our prospects to wait. We can train them to wait because there's always going to be a 30% off sale, right? And so
Right.
that's not a good thing. Or as I said earlier, we could erode the trust if we're having a going out of business sale today, and then we're also having it tomorrow. And yesterday was supposed to be the last day, but now today is the last day, and then oops, now next week is going to be the last day. That just kind of erodes the trust, and it will have blowback on us. But I think what we can do is we can think about our prospect market as falling into three different groups, right? Like we've kind of identified our prospects, and the truth is, some of them, when they see our message, are going to say, "Awesome! Oh my gosh, this is exactly what I need, exactly what I was hoping to find. Sign me up. I'm buying this today." And then we might have another portion of our target that says, "No way, no how. I wouldn't do that." Or if I were going to do that, I would only do it with this other company. I'm a dyed in the wool customer of theirs, and I would never use anyone else. So, on one hand, we've got people who are like, yes, 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 sign me up. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have people that we're just probably never going to convert. But then there's that third group that I would argue might even be the largest of the three segments in our target market. And they're the ones that could, in fact, become our clients, or they could become clients of our competitors. And it all has to do with, did we make our message stand out? Did we make our message easy for them to absorb? Did we provide enough of a reason why they should act now? And that's again where this brain science and these behavioral science tactics come into play. So it's using them responsibly, it's using them ethically, but it's using them in a way where it benefits both of us. If we really are down to the last few of some item, and we've been talking to our prospects are going to want to know that. In fact, they would reasonably be upset if they went to buy something and it wasn't there, and they would say, "Why didn't you tell me that there were only a few left?" So we're doing them a service by letting them know. We're not forcing them to buy, but we're letting them know that, hey, if you are interested, now would be the time to grab it, or you're likely going to be disappointed. So it is just, I think, being responsible about how we use these, and just understanding, what our customers and prospects are going through. I always say you can't go wrong if you treat people the way you'd like to be treated, and that I think is it's a good kind of a measuring device for us. Before we roll out a marketing message, it's like, how would I feel if I was on the other end of that? And as long as we're behaving ethically and responsibly and in a trustworthy way, as you say, we're on the right side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and two, like as you're talking about the different segments, will buy, won't buy, might buy, right? I feel like marketing and revenue funnels it's all a game of percentages, right? And what we're trying to do is increase the percentage of people that move from one stage to another. So, I guess, like, how do you think about A/B testing and running some experiments with this sort of thing, with kind of testing out different behavioral interventions? Because to your point, and to Jorge's point, and others, like, you're not getting to 100%. In fact, it's not the goal to get to 100%. But how are we testing to improve the performance of those interventions?
Yeah, that's a great topic to discuss, and I think there are a number of different ways that we can do some A/B testing. We can A/B test, email subject lines. We can A/B test headlines. If we're doing direct mail, we can A/B test the copy on the outside of the envelope. We can A/B test how we frame or position a product. We can A/B test what our call to action is, and and you can in fact see some significant differences in terms of response. I read about one case study where it was an e-commerce company, and they were introducing a $5 shipping charge. And of course, whenever you have to charge a shipping charge, everyone in marketing just kind of, dies a little, because we know that people don't like to pay them, right? But for whatever reason, this company was going to introduce the $5 charge. And, you take a little solace in knowing, well, it's only $5, right? And we all know what $5 is, right? especially, here, at least if we're here in the States, we understand what $5 is. But they decided to test. They did an A/B split, and they tested saying it was a $5 shipping fee or a small $5 shipping fee.
Hmm.
So they added the word in small, and you might say, well, duh, everyone knows what $5 is, and it's going to take up more space to have to put that word small in. But what they found was the difference between saying it's a $5 shipping fee and a small $5 shipping fee is they got a 20% increase in sales when they framed it as a small $5 shipping fee. So that is an example of a small test that had a big payoff, right? So that's that's a good example of how you can A/B test a call to action, or some of the language around your call to action. A colleague of mine was doing some work for a company that did ISO certifications, and the company was going to help make sure that you were up to speed and that you would be in compliance. But he tested two different lines. He tested ISO certification. Will your company pass? Or ISO certification, will your company fail? And he
Hmm.
found that fail won hands down. So that was some of that loss aversion framing. I mean, obviously the company was in business to help make sure you would pass, but so you could argue, well, the logical thing to do would be to lead with that benefit, lead with the what you're going to be paying for, and yet when they tested will your company pass versus will your company fail won hands down. So there are a lot of opportunities to kind of do that kind of an A/B split where like, all right, what are people going to respond to? One more example, I was doing some work with a client that tries to convince people to save money in their workplace retirement accounts, their 401k accounts or their 403b accounts. And so we did some work with them and we said, well, all right, we understand the context. We understand that some people feel like they don't know whether they should even be doing this. Maybe it's something that they should do further down the road when they're older. Other people feel they don't really have the money right now. Still, other people feel like it's probably a good idea, but I don't have any idea how much I should be saving in my workplace retirement account. So we took into account all of the context, and we tested three different messages. We tested one that was more of a social proof message, the idea that when you're not sure what to do, you look around, you see what other people are doing. And we said something like, see why so many of your colleagues are stashing cash in work retirement accounts. And then we did one that was a little bit more scarcity focused. And here the scarcity was not, limited quantity or limited time, but it was limited information, right? Information that's not widely available. And we talked about the secret to saving more that many people, or the secret to saving more that many people didn't know about. And then we tested a final one, and that was more of a loss aversion framing, and it was about the mistakes people make when it comes to workplace retirement accounts. So, taking into account the context, taking into account what we knew about, the mindset, the customers, the reasons why and why they might do something as well as why they might not. We kind of served up those three different behavioral science focused messages. And what was interesting was all of them did better than the baseline control. But in terms of getting people to open, in this case, it was in email, it was also tested in social, but in terms of getting people in the workplace to open the email, the loss aversion approach is what outperformed the other two. So, it's another great example of how you can A/B test in terms of how you're going to frame the message or serve it up or how you're going to position the product. So I think there are lots of opportunities, whether it's headlines and subject lines, or whether it's how you're going to position a market or position a product rather, and which benefits you want to kind of move up and market more, or whether it's the call to action. But there are lots of opportunities to see what it is people are going to respond to. And again, nobody's going to respond to everything, but our goal is to just get a few more people to
Hmm.
respond than normally would have. And the way to do that is to test some of these behavioral science principles and see if they move the needle.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What do you think about, how these sort of motivation principles or any of these behavioral science principles apply when it comes to customer marketing? Like, is there any difference when you're thinking about retention or renewals and that sort of thing versus trying to bring in new business or build up awareness?
Yeah, yeah. So we talked a little bit about loss aversion, right? The idea that
Mhm.
People don't want to lose what they already have. They're more motivated to keep what they already have and to not lose out. So when you couple that with something called the endowment effect, you have a really strong one-two punch. So the idea of the endowment effect is this notion that people place greater value on things that they already think of as their own, things that they already possess. And I say think of because in some cases, like in an acquisition perspective, we can describe something so vividly that people imagine what it's like to be a customer, and then they want to follow
Mhm.
through. But we're talking about existing customers. We're talking about retention, and so what we want to do is we want to kind of couple that idea of loss aversion with the endowment effect. One of the best examples I've ever seen of this was a wine by mail company, and they sent out an email saying that they had that I had a $15 credit in my account that was going to expire by midnight tomorrow. And I thought that was so motivating and so smart because they could have said, hey, we'll take $15 off a bottle of wine if you buy a bottle of wine by midnight tomorrow, or we'll give you a $15 rebate, or we're having a sale, right? But instead they said
Mhm.
you have $15 of credit in your account that will expire at midnight tomorrow. And that subtle but very meaningful shift, I think, made all the difference. So when we remind our existing customers of what they have when they're with us, and we couple that with the idea of not losing it, that can be a really, really strong way to keep people in place. When we're trying to get people to leave where they are, we talk about all the reasons someone should leave, but when we're trying to keep people where they are, we kind of talk about the reasons they shouldn't go. So instead of, the grass being greener on the other side, we talk about what if you end up losing the things that you have right now. What if it's not as good as the competition is saying? Do you really want to walk away from the award-winning customer experience that you've become accustomed to, right? We want to remind people of what they have, whether it's the $15 credit, whether it's the great client relationship. And I read an interesting case study. I think it was from Adobe, and what they did is when people called to cancel their subscription, typically the customer service reps on the phone were trained to ask, well, why are you calling to cancel? Which, it makes sense, right? We want to capture this information. Maybe we can, do something with it, But they decided to flip the script. And instead of saying, well, Jen, why are you calling to cancel? They said, okay, Jen, I, understand, tell me, why did you subscribe to begin with? And by changing the question, they got people to focus on the reasons they had originally subscribed and why they liked that company and what it was they were going to get from that product. And then it allowed the customer service rep to propose, a slightly different solution and still retain the customer. So they actually ended up experiencing an increase in retention by just simply switching the question from why do you want to leave to why did you originally subscribe to begin with? So I think it's reminding people what they have that really helps keep them, that helps us retain them. So I think that's a smart thing to think about when we're talking about retention marketing. It's, people don't want to lose out, so it's loss aversion coupled with the endowment effect, reminding them of what they already have, and making them feel like, oh yeah, you're right, I don't want to lose that. Those can be two very powerful behavioral science tactics to use when it comes to retention marketing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like such subtle shifts that actually make a really big difference. And as you were describing why did you sign up to begin with? In my head, I'm going, oh, brilliant, brilliant, right? And so simple, such a simple change, but you basically just got your customer to convince themselves why they want to stay, get them talking about all the great reasons why they started. I love it. That's a great tip for anybody who's got marketing involved with their customer success teams and doing sort of renewal and retention work.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. You're getting someone to do the sale themselves, make the sale themselves by
Right,
just, reminding themselves, oh yeah, this is why I want to stay. So
right,
it was brilliant. And it really comes down to understanding a little bit about what makes people tick, right?
right, right. Yeah, you just made it their idea. I mean, that's the best way to do it. Um, Now, what do you think? Are there any sort of emerging areas of behavioral science that appear promising for marketers, and how might they change what we're doing today?
Sure, sure. So there's always research being done,
Mhm.
constantly, constantly. And, so there are new things coming to light all the time. But I think maybe the area that represents perhaps the most interesting shift, or the potential for the biggest growth, is the idea of coupling artificial intelligence. I know I'm going to say the AI word, everyone's talking about it, but coupling artificial intelligence with behavioral science, because I think, with artificial intelligence, we will be able to crunch data faster, which is great. And if we can crunch data faster by using AI, it would, at a minimum, help us identify who we want to target, the best people to target. It would help us quickly identify where we're most likely to find them. It would help us segment them so that we know which message would play best, or which offer would play best per segment, right? We can crunch all of this data so much more efficiently with artificial intelligence, so that we can, kind of get to all of those things. Who am I talking to? Where am I going to find them? What's the right message and offer for this particular segment? And then when you couple that with behavioral science, which tells us how to best serve up that message, the best words and phrases and frames to use to make the message, as relevant as possible, to make it, as resonant as possible, to make it stand out and, get noticed and responded to. I think that represents a big opportunity for marketers in the future, this kind of combination of artificial intelligence and behavioral science.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your point about being able to access the data and sort of analyze it faster, it just becomes more, you're making more real time decisions on whatever it is you're experimenting with or kind of putting into place. My sort of last question for you today on all of this stuff, like this is, I love everything that we're talking about. I'm a very kind of data driven person. I want to know the stats. When you're talking about like 22% lift in your open rates, like that's where I live and breathe, right? But when you start to think about applying these principles, how does that impact your ability to be creative as a marketer? Like, at what point do you stick with what's tried and true and with what works? And how do you experiment and try new things at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because it's like I talk about behavioral science, and you hear the word science, and you're like, oh, no, no, what? I'm in marketing. I'm creative. In fact, I'm in the creative department in marketing. So what is this science thing? But I look at creative as being in service of ultimately selling a product, right, or building a brand. Or maybe the two together, right? Where you're trying to build a brand, or you're trying to build a business, or maybe you're doing the two together. And so the idea of like just creative for creative sake, it isn't, I mean, that's not what your clients are paying for. If you run an agency like I do, it's not what you're being paid for if you work inside a marketing department at a company. The idea is, ultimately at the end of the day, we want some kind of a return on investment. And what we're trying to do is be as, creative about how we can get there as possible. Because we and in because we're looking for creative ways to make it more likely that we reach people, that make it more likely that we convince people. And so I think it kind of opens up the toolkit for us, and it gives us just more things to use in order to craft those messages, in order to come up with the right language or the right visuals that are really going to make a difference, or even just the right campaign. Um, I was working on a client that was selling insurance to dentists, and I know I've probably just lost all your listeners right there between dentist and insurance. Although apologies to anyone who might be a dentist who's in the audience, but not the most exciting topics, right? But we're trying to sell dentists to insurance, and we're trying to sell insurance to dentists, and the thing is, once you buy insurance, it's you don't ever want to look at it again. It's like I've checked it off my list. And in this particular case, the assignment was to get them to buy some more, because the truth of the matter is, dentist, everybody, every couple of years you should relook at how much insurance you have, how much life insurance you have, because your situation may have changed, your practice may have grown, you might have children, you might have greater, you might have expanded, have greater financial responsibilities, or perhaps you're starting to contract. But regardless, every few years you should take a look and just make sure that the coverage you have is lined up with where you are. And nobody wants to do that, right? Nobody wants to do that. So we tested this message that was inspired by something I read in Dr. Robert Cialdini's book, Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. And he talked about something called the pull of the magnetic middle. And what he was saying was that human nature is such that, for the most part, we don't like to be out on the bleeding edge, and we don't like to be lagging behind. We feel most comfortable in the middle. And I said, how can we use that? I'm thinking about it. It sounded, when I read it, I'm like, that's absolutely very true. I mean, sometimes we want to be out on the bleeding edge, and sometimes we want to be lagging, but most of the times we do feel comfortable in the middle. That's safety and numbers thing. So what we did is we sent out this marketing message that had a chart, and the chart at one end said, $0, the least amount of insurance anyone could have. The other end of the chart said 2 or 3 million. It was whatever the most was that the company sold. And then we had a little thing that said, you are here. And in every case, we made sure that you are here was less than halfway. So if it was 3 million, the you are here would be, people who had less than 1.5 million. And if it was 0 to 2 million, if that's what the chart was, because I don't remember, if it was 0 to 2 million, the you are here would be anyone who was less than 1 million. But the idea was we were targeting people who had less than, half of what they could have sold or what they could have purchased. And we didn't think that people would automatically go and buy the full amount, but we did think it would move them closer to the middle. We got a 459% lift over the control just by using that, that behavioral science thinking. Before you've even read a word of the message, you're looking at that chart, you're seeing that little thing that says you are here, and you have that gut reaction. You're like, I'm lagging behind, right?
Mm.
I'm not in that safe spot in the middle. I better move there. And again, we were selling increases in insurance, and so that 459% lift was a sales lift. It wasn't inquiries or lead gen. This was literally additional insurance policies, or an additional insurance coverage, I should say, sold. So, circling back to your original question, this is how behavioral science helps you become more creative. It frees you up to come up with some more interesting messaging that really is going to appeal to how people make decisions and some of the decision defaults that they routinely rely on.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. It's got to work together. And I love what you said about, the creative is in service of business growth or brand lift or whatever. Like there's an objective here that we're all trying to meet. And it doesn't mean that we are doing the same thing over and over again and never get to be creative. It just means that the creative has to be driven by the data and the science behind it, which I think is a great way to think about it. So thank you
Yeah.
for that.
No, absolutely. And you know what? Sometimes messages start to fatigue. So even if you find something that works and it's this wonderful blend of, behavioral science and best practices, after a while, that message is going to start to fatigue, and we have to come up with another new, fresh, interesting, and effective way to do things. So it's not just same old, even when you're using behavioral science.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see this in content a lot, like search behavior changes and something that ranked doesn't rank anymore. Like you kind of have to always be on top of this stuff. And I think that's another reason why what you said about the combination of sort of behavioral science and AI is important, like, or even really any kind of data driven approaches, being able to get to the answers faster is going to help us be more agile in our decision making, right? Of like, oh, something isn't working the way it used to. Let's make an adjustment. Let's get creative, or let's see how we can improve the performance. A lot faster than kind of letting things run and testing on a quarterly basis or whatever we might have done in the past.
Absolutely, yeah. More real time, which allows us to be to be more effective. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining. Please, everybody out there, go grab a copy of Nancy's book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, on Amazon and other places, I'm sure, right?
Oh
Nancy,
yeah,
anywhere else you should direct people
published by
to?
Kogan Page. You can get it at Kogan Page or Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Target or really anywhere. But thank you for that plug. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining today. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. We're going to be back with another episode later this week. I'm going to be chatting with Ali Jawin. I'll see you then.